I honestly never thought I'd have a story to tell. To this day, when I think about what happened, I get shivers down my spine. At the time, I was about 28 and had just moved into an old building, one of those three-story places that seemed to have a story in every brick. It was a pretty lonely time for me, you know? I was focused on my work as a graphic designer, spent all day in front of the computer, and the nights were for relaxing, reading a book, or watching a movie. I'm a very organized and methodical person, so anything out of place bothers me. The apartment was perfect for me, spacious, with a huge bookshelf that was my dream, and a neighborhood that, at first, seemed way too quiet. I met Mrs. Fatima, a super friendly old lady who lived upstairs and always greeted me with a smile. Next door, in apartment 102, lived Daniel. We only saw each other occasionally in the hallway. He was a man of few words, always with a slightly distant look, and we just exchanged head nods. I thought he was just shy. You know, the first strange thing happened about 2 weeks after I moved in. I have a spare set of keys that I always keep inside a dresser drawer, you know, so I don't lose them. One day, I went to grab a charger from there and saw that the drawer was empty. I stood there, trying to remember where I had put them, but my memory is good for those things. That's when I turned to grab my wallet off the table and saw the set of keys hanging on the hook by the door. The same hook where I hung my everyday keys. I spent a good few minutes staring at it. I was absolutely sure I hadn't put them there. I thought I must be stressed, forgetful, but the feeling that something wasn't right had already started to gnaw at me. I began to pay more attention, but life went on as normal, and I ended up chalking it up to tiredness. But from then on, small things started to change in a subtle and disturbing way. And the scariest part was that I was the only one who noticed that I was going crazy, seriously. It was a series of small slips that only I noticed. For example, I was reading a book, marked the page with a sticky note, and left it on the coffee table. The next day, when I went to get it, the book was closed on my couch, with a sticky note about 10 pages ahead. I remember staring at it, trying to process how I could have done that. But the thing that annoyed me the most was the TV remote. I always left it on the corner of the coffee table, near the lamp. Several times, I would come back from the kitchen, and it would be on the other end of the table, near the magazines. It didn't make any sense. I lived alone, I didn't have any pets. I started to feel watched, like someone was laughing at me from somewhere. And so, to try and prove to myself that I wasn't going crazy, I started setting my own little traps, a kind of childish way to test my sanity, but it was all I had. The first trap was a one real coin balanced on the edge of a book I was reading. If the coin fell, it was because someone had moved it. I left it there, went to work, came back, and the coin was on the floor, right next to the book. My heart already started racing. Then, I hung a towel on my office chair, in a very specific way, with one of the ends folded inward. When I got home, the towel was just thrown over the backrest. The fear was starting to take over. The nights became heavier. I started sleeping with the bedroom door locked. The peak of the panic came when I got home from work, and on my desk, there was a yellow sticky note I had never seen before. On it, in strange handwriting, it was written, "You're a heavy sleeper." I swear, my blood ran cold right then. The words echoed in my head. I spent the whole night awake, with the bread knife in my hand, looking into every corner of my apartment. Fear had already turned into a palpable terror that I don't know how, but I gathered what little courage I had left and decided I was going to do something about it. The paranoia was terrifying, but the idea of having someone coming in and out of my house, seeing my every move, was worse. I thought about installing security cameras. I went online, researched models, but the fear that the intruder would disable them or find a way to get around them paralyzed me. That's when I had the idea to take an old, very small camera and hide it on the bookshelf, pointed at the door. I didn't want the camera to be the solution, but a way to prove to myself that something was wrong. After installing the camera, I started watching the recordings with a kind of desperate hope that it was all just paranoia, that I was just a stressed guy imagining things. But the videos were clear. My door, which seemed to be the only entrance, was never opened. No one came in. No one left. I watched hours and hours of footage, the camera capturing only the silence and the bookshelf full of books. That emptiness was scarier than if I had seen someone. How was it possible? The sticky note, the keys, the towel, all of it had happened, but the images told me there was no one. The feeling of being fooled by an invisible force made me even more desperate. This lack of evidence made me question everything. Was I completely losing it? But the most bizarre proof, the sticky note, was physical. It was there. I saved it in a sealed envelope as proof of my sanity. It was a full day of paranoia, my head pounding with 1,000 questions. That's when, suddenly, I stopped looking at the bookshelf and started looking at the wall. The wall that separated my apartment from Daniel's apartment. It was what you call instinct, you know? That flash of clarity in the middle of chaos. I had my ear pressed against the wall and noticed a slight difference in the plaster's texture, a line that didn't look natural. It was almost invisible, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. I started running my hand over it, following the line, feeling the small imperfection, the way it seemed to outline a rectangular area behind the bookshelf. I moved the bookshelf with a force I didn't even know I had, and there it was, a kind of wooden panel, cleverly camouflaged into the wall. I just stood there, my heart beating so fast it felt like it would tear through my chest. The wood looked old, worn, and had a small crack on the side. My breath was heavy, my hands shaking. I knew, with absolute certainty, that what I was about to find there was the answer to my entire nightmare. It was either the end of my sanity or the beginning of a much more terrifying truth. I stuck my hand in the crack, and with a dry snap, the panel opened. And it was there, in the gloom of that hole, that I saw what would haunt me forever. It was a tunnel. My whole body froze. The darkness of that tunnel was complete. It seemed to swallow the light from my apartment. The air coming from there was heavy and smelled of mold and old dust. My brain, which was already in a state of collapse, began to put the pieces together, but the picture that formed was so bizarre that I couldn't accept it. The wall between the apartments. Daniel. Things moving. It had to be him. I could only think about how he could have access to this. My fear turned into a cold rage and a desperate need to understand. I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. My eyes could barely adjust to the darkness, but I could see the worn, uneven wood that lined the tunnel walls. It looked like something built decades ago, with a series of rusty nails and irregular planks. It was surreal and disturbing. I took a step back, bumping into the bookshelf, making the book sway. The noise snapped me out of my trance for a moment. I needed to be rational. He could be in there. The fear came back, stronger than before, mixed with the adrenaline of someone about to discover something terrible. I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and went back to the hole in the wall, the light trembling in my hand. The light revealed more macabre details. That tunnel wasn't just a shortcut between the apartments. It was a makeshift labyrinth with several diversions and small niches in the wall. In one of these niches, I saw what looked like a kind of diary, bound in old leather, and a bunch of loose notes, all in the same handwriting as the sticky note. My stomach churned, but my curiosity and desperation pushed me inside. I had to know. I had to understand. The flashlight beam seemed to be sucked into the tunnel's darkness, and the silence was so oppressive that I could hear my own breathing. I stepped into the tunnel, flashlight in hand, trembling, illuminating the worn planks. Every step echoed in the silence, and I felt like I was entering a place that shouldn't exist. That's when, a few feet in, the flashlight beam caught the most bizarre and disturbing image I had ever seen. Inside one of the improvised niches I had noticed earlier, there was a mural made of hundreds of photos of me, taken from inside my own home. Photos of me sleeping in bed, photos of me eating, at the computer, reading. Photos of my life, my routine. The photos were pinned with thumbtacks, and some had notes around them, in the same handwriting as the sticky note. Sleep routine, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Breakfast, bread and coffee, no variations. Fridays, late night reading. I was right there, in a tunnel, seeing my life narrated by a stranger. The sight was so grotesque that my stomach completely churned. They were such intimate details, things I only did when I was alone. I looked at the photos, then at the hole in the wall that led to my apartment, and at the darkness that continued in the direction of Daniel's apartment. The flashlight beam trembled in my shaking hand, and fear was no longer a sensation. It was a physical thing, suffocating me. I felt violated, exposed. My apartment, my refuge, wasn't mine. It was a stage, and I was the main actor in a private horror show, and Daniel was the audience. I turned around. The tunnel now seemed much darker and more threatening, and I had to get out of there. I had to escape. But before I could take another step, I heard a creak. The access panel, The door connecting me to my apartment was closing. Panic. That dry sound of the wooden panel closing was the trigger for my total despair. I was trapped, in the dark, and it wasn't just the dark that terrified me. It was the fact that someone had closed that door. I turned around, pushed the wood with all my might, but it wouldn't budge. I was screaming now, a muffled, hoarse sound that seemed to disappear into the tunnel's vacuum. The flashlight in my hand started to fail, the light flickering, and I could hear footsteps. Slow but steady steps, coming from the direction of Daniel's apartment. The flashlight light finally went out, and I was swallowed by the darkness. The silence was complete again, but the footsteps, I could hear them perfectly. They stopped. I felt the air move, a presence, and the smell of mold intensified. And then, a faint light came on. The light of a lamp hanging from the tunnel's ceiling. In front of it stood Daniel. He wasn't smiling, but his gaze was worse than any smile. It was the look of someone who had watched me for so long that he no longer saw me as a person, but as an object. He was holding an old camera, one of those with a flash, and pointing it at me, his hand steady, as if he had done this hundreds of times. And behind him, what seemed to be the continuation of that tunnel, but with a different look, like a room, a sanctuary. I felt tiny and helpless. My eyes went straight to his hands, and that's when I saw it. He was holding a photo of me, taken that very day, sleeping in my bed. A photo he took, and that I would never have known existed if I hadn't been there at that moment. He was showing me the final proof that we stared at each other. Me, with a pale face and a trembling body, and him, Daniel, with that empty, disturbing look. He didn't say a word. He just nodded his head, as if greeting me, and stepped to the side, revealing what was in the continuation of the tunnel. It was a kind of tiny room, but it served as a private office, an observation room. There was a desk with a computer, monitoring screens showing the inside of my apartment, all the cameras he must have installed. And on the wall, there was a shelf full of notebooks. I had already seen one of them and knew what they were. They were the diaries, the notes, the meticulously documented routine about my life, his life, other neighbors. I wasn't the only victim. He was the spy of that building, the ghost that haunted all our lives that I felt such great despair that I managed to find a strength I didn't know I had. My eyes fixed on the flashlight, which had fallen at my feet. I picked it up, and with a scream that seemed to have come from another world, I threw it forcefully at his head. The camera flew, his body stumbled, and I saw the panic in his eyes. It was my chance. I didn't think, I just acted. I pushed him to the side, ran towards the exit, and with a strong kick, the panel opened. I got out of the tunnel, running towards my living room, to my door. I left my apartment without looking back, the adrenaline consuming me. I ran to the street and only stopped when I was far away, with the phone in my hand, calling the police. When the police arrived, there was no one in the tunnel and everything was clean. No cameras, no diaries, just the hole in the wall. Daniel, my neighbor, had disappeared. They didn't find anything in his apartment, and the authorities closed the case as a crazy story, and me, a paranoid lunatic. But I know what I saw. I still have the sticky notes saved, and every now and then, I think about Daniel and get chills down my spine. I never went back to that apartment. You know when you're just chilling, browse around, and you stumble upon something that reminds you of a bizarre phase of your life. That's what happened to me today, and man, the whole thing still gives me the chills. My name is Leo, and a few years ago, my life was a controlled mess. I was in my late 20s, living in a cramped apartment in a mid-sized city, and working at an accounting office that was, to be honest, pretty monotonous. The routine was the same. Wake up, black coffee, crowded subway, and endless spreadsheets. But outside of work, I had Marissa. Marissa. In the beginning, she was the spark my life was missing. She had this intense way of living, of talking, of loving, that consumed me completely. We met at a concert, and the connection was instantaneous, like something out of a movie. She had these green, almost feline eyes, and a laugh that filled any room. The problem was, over time, that intensity turned into an obsession. All that love transformed into a suffocating possessiveness, and I started to feel like a caged bird. It escalated, until one day, she just showed up at my job, crying at the reception desk because I hadn't answered a call. That was the last straw. Breaking up with her was like trying to break a rock with your bare hands. She cried, she screamed, she begged, but I was decided. I knew I had to get away. After that day, I blocked her number, deleted her from social media, and even changed my phone number, thinking that would be enough to give me the peace I so desperately needed. For about 2 weeks, life went back to normal. The relief was palpable. I could breathe again. The routine of boring spreadsheets and crowded subways even seemed like paradise. I started hanging out with my friends again, going to bars, and the feeling of freedom was addictive. I really thought I had escaped. But then, the letters started. The first one appeared in my mailbox, folded and with no envelope, no stamp, nothing. The handwriting was hers, unmistakable. At first, the notes were kind of melancholic, with her saying she missed me, that she didn't understand why I had left. I ignored them, thinking it was just a phase. What I didn't know was that it was just the beginning of something much scarier. At first, I thought it was all in my head, that she was just trying to get my attention. But the notes started to get different, more specific. One morning, I found a folded piece of paper in the crack of my door, and what was written on it made me break out in a cold sweat. You checked your door lock 3 times before you left today, Leo. Are you still afraid of the dark? My heart pounded. How did she know? I hadn't even noticed I did that. I started looking out the window, onto the street, to see if I could spot her, but there was no one. The next week, another note, this time left in my mailbox again. You were wearing your blue hoodie with the hole in the sleeve when you went to the grocery store. You should buy new clothes, baby. You're looking tired. That hoodie was my favorite, and the rip in the sleeve was something only I knew about. That detail broke me inside. The peace I had felt vanished, replaced by an anxiety that consumed me 24/7. I started to feel like a caged animal, like I was being hunted. I would suddenly stop on the street, look over my shoulder, keep an eye on the windows of neighboring apartments, wondering if she was there, watching me. The feeling was unbearable. The days became a blur of paranoia. I started changing my routines. I took a different route to work, went to the grocery store at random times, and even avoided wearing clothes that could be easily identified, but the notes kept appearing. The last one, before I made a drastic decision, was the worst. It was on my car, taped to the windshield, a note that said, "Your dog loves you, but I love you more." It was terrifying because the only time I had been out with the dog was the night before. The note made me realize she was much closer than I imagined, maybe even waiting for me outside my apartment. I had to run. Honestly, it was terrifying. For over a month, I walked around with my heart in my throat, looking over my shoulder constantly, without a second of peace. Every noise on the street, every car that stopped at the corner, I thought it was her. The paranoia consumed me to the point where I could barely sleep. So I decided I had to truly run, to disappear off the map. I quit my job, lied to everyone saying I was moving to another city for an irresistible job offer, and instead, I moved to a random town in the countryside, in a completely different state. I changed my name on the utility and internet bills, rented a P.O. box under a fake name, and started rebuilding my life from scratch, hoping that this time, the nightmare was truly over. And for a while, it really seemed like it was. I went months without any news, without any notes, without any letters. The peace I felt in those weeks was indescribable. I started to feel alive again, to walk the streets without fear, to smile again. Freedom felt like a gift, something I had to protect with all my might. But life has a bizarre way of reminding us that the past isn't that far away. One day, I went to get my mail from the P.O. box. There was a Polaroid picture, one of those old school ones, in the middle of the bills and junk mail. The photo was of me. I was walking my dog, Snoopy, on the street, with my head down and my body kind of slumped. And on the back of the photo, the handwriting I would recognize anywhere. "Your shoulders slouch when you're tired, Leo." I felt a knot in my throat, and my legs went weak. The ground seemed to have disappeared from under me. How did she find me? I hadn't told anyone where I went. No one, not even my closest friends. I looked around, but the street was empty. The P.O. box was just another metal box, with a bunch of other metal boxes next to it. There was nothing suspicious. The horror paralyzed me. The feeling that she was still watching me, that all my effort to escape had been in vain, consumed me again. I threw the photo away, and our AN.IT was such a big shock that I could barely think straight. The first thing I did was drop everything again. Without a second thought, I quit my job, grabbed the essentials, threw them in the car, and hit the road, with no destination, just the goal of getting as far away from there as possible. I drove for almost 2 days, stopping only to get gas and a quick bite to eat. I just wanted to get lost. I ended up in a very isolated rural area, in a small town that seemed to have stopped in time, in the middle of nowhere. There, I rented a cabin, in a place so remote that the only way to communicate was with an old cell phone, one of those that are only good for making calls, and which I bought with cash. There was no internet, no neighbors nearby, nothing. The peace of that place was almost frightening, and for months, it was my refuge. I felt safe, as if the trees and mountains were a natural barrier against the madness that was chasing me. It was just me, Snoopy, and the silence. It was perfect. The routine in the cabin was simple. Wake up with the sun, walk through the forest, fish in the river, and read. I disconnected from the world, becoming a voluntary hermit. The peace was so great that the paranoia started to decrease, until I started to think that the photo in the P.O. box had been a fluke, a bizarre coincidence. I was already starting to convince myself that I had finally managed to truly escape, until one morning, reality punched me in the gut. I opened the living room window, and there, in the fresh snow that had fallen overnight, were footprints. They were human footprints, going from the road to my window, and they stopped right there, where I was. And they went back to the road. I hadn't had any visitors, and there was no one in the neighborhood who would come all the way out there. My blood ran cold. That panic, that fear that she was close again, invaded every cell of my body. The peace vanished in a second. She had found me. Again, I don't know how long I stood there, staring at those footprints in the snow. The panic was so overwhelming that I could barely move. The reality that no matter how much I ran, she would always find me, hit me with full force. That cabin, which was once my sanctuary, now seemed like the perfect trap. I felt exposed, like I was in a storefront window. That day was the turning point. I spent the rest of the afternoon locked inside, with the curtains closed, looking at the door and windows, waiting for something, but I didn't know what. With every creak of the cabin's wood, with every howl of the wind, I jumped. The silence that once calmed me was now terrifying. I was trapped in my own mind, with the certainty that she was out there, somewhere. Night came, and with it, the peak of my fear. I was sitting in the living room armchair, with Snoopy on my lap, when I heard a noise at the door. A noise different from anything I had ever heard. It was the sound of something being taped. I froze. Snoopy, who is a super calm dog, started to growl softly, the fur on his neck standing up. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest, and I stayed there, paralyzed, without the courage to go see. After a few minutes, the silence returned, but the tension was palpable. I waited another hour, until curiosity and the fear of not knowing were greater. With my phone's flashlight in my hand, and trembling from head to toe, I approached the door very slowly. The light from the flashlight revealed a small envelope taped to the wood. My whole body went cold, and I knew, deep down, that it wasn't a bill or junk mail. It was hers. With a shaking hand, I ripped the envelope from the door. Marissa's handwriting was there, again, on the return address. I opened the envelope and my world collapsed. Inside, a photo of us, taken on our first day together, when we were just two young people in love and happy. But it wasn't the original photo. Her eyes had been gouged out with scissors, leaving two empty, grotesque holes. And on the back, just one word, written in big red letters: now. The message was clear, disturbing, and brutal. She was no longer just watching me. She was threatening me, and in a way much more personal than any previous note. That final note, that act of mutilating her own image, made me understand that she was no longer the Marissa I knew, and that her madness had reached a new level. There was no turning back. Looking at that photo made me feel a chill that ran through my entire body. Terrified, I didn't think twice. I grabbed Snoopy, his leash, the car keys, and ran out without looking back. I didn't grab any clothes or anything, just the car. I drove through the night, with no destination, no direction, with the only goal of escaping and not stopping until I was safe. I didn't know what now meant, but the image of her empty eyes gave me the certainty that she was about to do something terrible. I could only think of one thing: disappear. And that's what I did. I drove for miles, terrified and completely exhausted. I stopped at a roadside diner and called the only friend I was sure wouldn't tell anyone about me. I told him what happened and asked for help. He lived in a bigger city, and most importantly, he lived with two military guys he had met in the army, who, according to him, were tough as nails. That was the only security I could have at that moment. He didn't question anything. He gave me the address and told me to get there as fast as possible. I arrived in the middle of the night. He met me at the door, and I broke down, telling him every detail of the bizarre story I had lived. The other two guys listened to everything in silence and looked at me with an expression of worry and disbelief at the same time. But they believed me. They said I could stay there for as long as I wanted, and I accepted. Their presence gave me a strange comfort, a feeling that, finally, I had some security. The weeks turned into months, and time passed. I started sleeping again. The fear dissipated, and I began to feel a little normal again. That I never saw or heard from Marissa again. The note stopped. The silence I had so desperately sought finally arrived, and it has been with me for years. I know it was her. I'm sure of it. I've looked for her name in missing persons reports, on social media, anywhere I could, but I've never found anything. That episode changed me completely. Today, I'm a recluse. I moved to another city again, but this time, not running, but choosing a place where I could live in peace. My dog, Snoopy, is gone, and I never had the courage to get another one. I have a new job, a new life, and a new identity, but Marissa's shadow haunts me to this day. I can't get into a relationship with anyone. I have a phobia of intimacy, and my apartment door has 2 locks and a bolt. I don't know what happened to her, and part of me doesn't want to know. But the image of those empty eyes still haunts me, and the question now still echoes in my head. What did she mean by that? What was she going to do? I don't know, and maybe it's better that way. I just hope she never finds me again. I still can't bring myself to say her name out loud, even now. It's been a little over a year, and the sound of those syllables still makes my skin crawl. It all started so innocently, you know? My life back then was a beautiful, chaotic whirlwind. My husband, Mark, was a software architect, basically living on his laptop, and I was a graphic designer trying to keep a freelance career alive, while also chasing a 1.5-year-old tornado named Lily. Our apartment was a constant battlefield of toys and half-eaten snacks, but it was our beautiful mess. We were exhausted, sure, but we were happy. The only missing piece was a reliable nanny, someone we could trust to help us reclaim a few hours a day. We'd gone through a string of college kids who were more interested in their phones than in Lily, so when we found Chloe, it felt like a miracle sent from above. She was this quiet, almost ethereal young woman with eyes that seemed to hold a world of calm, and a way with Lily that was just magnetic. From the moment she walked in, Lily was smitten, and so were we. That I remember her interview like it was yesterday. She wore this simple, lavender dress that made her look like she'd stepped out of a classic painting. She spoke so softly, but every word was intentional, thoughtful. She told us she grew up with 7 younger siblings, and that caring for children wasn't a job for her. It was a calling. Mark and I looked at each other, and I knew we were both thinking the same thing. This is it. She's the one. We hired her on the spot. For the first couple of weeks, it was pure bliss. My apartment wasn't a disaster zone anymore. I was meeting deadlines again, and Mark was less stressed. But the real magic was what she did for Lily. Our daughter, who was usually a bit shy around new people, would light up the second Chloe arrived. They'd spend hours in the living room, building these elaborate blanket forts that looked like they were designed by an actual architect, not just a toddler and her nanny. Chloe had this quiet, steady energy that just seemed to settle Lily, and I was so grateful. I truly thought we had hit the jackpot. I was so wrong, and that bliss lasted for exactly 3 weeks. The change was so subtle at first, I almost didn't notice it. Lily, my little shadow who would follow me everywhere, started getting a little more clingy with Chloe. I figured it was just the newness of the relationship, the excitement of having a dedicated playmate. But then, it got weirder. I'd be in the kitchen, and I'd hear Chloe telling Lily a story in this low, conspiratorial whisper. The moment I walked in, Chloe would straighten up, and the storytelling would stop. It was like I was interrupting something private, something sacred between them. When I tried to pick Lily up for a hug, she'd sometimes squirm away, her little body stiff with a kind of fear I had never seen before. She would look at Chloe with these huge, worried eyes, as if she was checking for permission, and only when Chloe gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod would Lily relax a little. The first time it happened, my heart actually ached. The real red flags, though, started fluttering a couple of weeks later. I was getting ready to take Lily to the park, and I asked Chloe what they had done that morning. "Oh, we had a lovely time," she said with that same calm smile. But her eyes were cold, like a porcelain doll's. Lily was just a little sad because Mommy was too busy to play with her. I remember freezing, my hand on the doorknob. I had been in a conference call for an hour, but I had explicitly told Chloe to tell Lily that I would be free as soon as it was over. I felt a chill run down my spine. The way she said it wasn't accusatory. It was just a simple, matter-of-fact statement, but it carried this undertone of a secret I was already supposed to know. Later that day, I found a half-eaten chocolate bar hidden in Lily's toy chest. Lily had a serious allergy to nuts, and I had a strict no chocolate rule. I confronted Chloe about it, and she feigned such shock and dismay, with her eyes welling up with tears, that I ended up apologizing to her. She even gave me a sad little pat on the arm and said, "It's all right, Sarah. I know you're just stressed, but Lily needs a little more sugar in her life." And that's when it clicked. That's when I knew something was deeply, terribly wrong, that it's hard to pinpoint exactly when Mark stopped seeing it. But it was like a slow, creeping fog that clouded his judgment. Chloe was a master manipulator. She'd wait for me to bring up something about Lily's odd behavior, and before I could even finish my sentence, she'd already have a perfectly reasonable, yet completely twisted, explanation. "Oh, Sarah," she'd say with a gentle, pitying look, "Lily is just getting so attached to me. It's a natural developmental stage. She's learning that she can love more than one person." And Mark, God bless him, would nod along. He saw her as the calm in our storm, the one who made our lives run smoothly, the one who wasn't constantly on edge like I was. I'd come home and find the front door slightly ajar or a window unlocked, and when I'd confront him about it, he'd say, "It's just a mistake, Sarah. Chloe's not perfect. You're making a mountain out of a molehill." The more I tried to express my fears, the more I sounded like a jealous, paranoid wife, and the more Mark distanced himself, seeing me as the problem, not the solution. One particularly awful evening, I walked in to find Lily crying inconsolably in her crib, and Chloe nowhere to be found. My heart was in my throat. I ran around the apartment, calling her name, a cold dread washing over me. I finally found her on the balcony, calmly watering a small herb garden she had started. She turned to me with a serene smile, as if nothing was wrong. "Oh, she's just having a little meltdown," she said, her voice a calm river. I was just giving her some quiet time to process her feelings. I was shaking with fury. I told her that was not okay, that Lily needed comfort, not isolation. Chloe's smile never wavered. "Sarah," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that sounded more like a threat than a friendly piece of advice, "you need to trust me. Lily and I have a very special connection. You don't want to get in the way of that, do you?" Her eyes, usually so serene, held a flash of something dark, something truly sinister. It was a warning, and in that moment, I knew I was alone. Mark was at the office, Lily was a frightened stranger, and I was in my own home, a prisoner of this woman's twisted game. That was the night the last bit of doubt I had left crumbled to dust. I spent the rest of the evening feeling like a ghost in my own house, watching Chloe put on a perfect show for Mark and a terrified Lily, all while I was a silent, frantic observer. The next morning, as soon as Chloe arrived, I told her I had a doctor's appointment and needed to run out for a bit. She smiled, too sweetly, and said she'd take care of everything. The moment the front door closed, I didn't go to a doctor. Instead, I drove to the nearest electronics store, my mind racing with a singular, desperate thought. I needed a nanny cam. I walked into the store feeling like a criminal on a mission. I didn't know anything about this stuff, so I just grabbed the first inconspicuous-looking one I could find. It was a small, black box that looked like a tiny air freshener. It felt so wrong, so intrusive, but the alternative, losing my daughter's love, felt like a slow death. I drove home, my hands shaking so much I could barely unlock the door. Hiding it was the hardest part. I had to be sneaky. I found the perfect spot on a high bookshelf in the living room, a place where she and Lily spent most of their time, tucked away behind a decorative vase that my grandmother had given me. It had this strange, swirling pattern of dark blues and greens, and I remember thinking it was the perfect distraction. The camera was tiny, almost invisible. I rushed to set it up, my heart pounding in my ears, connecting it to my phone with a shaky hand. The moment the live feed popped up on my screen, showing an empty room bathed in morning light, I felt a terrible mix of relief and dread. I put on my coat again, grabbed my keys, and walked out of the apartment, a sick feeling twisting in my stomach. I got into my car and just sat there in the parking lot, staring at the live feed, feeling like a stalker in my own life. I saw Chloe and Lily enter the frame a few minutes later, and that's when I saw it. The casual, subtle movements. The way Chloe would gently take Lily's hand away from a book I had given her, replacing it with a doll I had never seen before. The way she would talk to her in that same low whisper, her back to the camera, shielding Lily from view. My blood ran cold, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the truth was about to unravel, that I was right. About everything. And that's the most terrifying part. I sat in my car, my stomach in knots, watching the tiny screen on my phone. Chloe and Lily were on the couch now, and Chloe was holding a small, intricate locket that I'd never seen before. She was whispering to Lily again, her face close to my daughter's, a secret smile playing on her lips. I could see Lily's tiny hand reaching up, her fingers tracing the design on the locket, her expression a mix of fascination and fear. Chloe then put the locket around Lily's neck and whispered something, her words too soft to be picked up by the camera's microphone. But I could see the effect. Lily's shoulders slumped, and she looked down at the locket, her whole posture seeming to shrink. It was a physical manifestation of a bond one was being intentionally locked out of. It was later that night when the real horror began. Mark was still at work, and I was in the kitchen, pretending to make dinner, my eyes glued to the live feed. I watched as Chloe got Lily ready for bed, the whole process so gentle and loving on the surface. But then she tucked Lily in, and that's when I saw it. The camera was pointed right at the crib. Chloe leaned in, her face a mask of false tenderness, and whispered in Lily's ear. I could only make out a few words, but they were enough to make my blood run cold. She was telling Lily that Mommy is too busy to play, and that Daddy doesn't care about you like I do. She was planting these seeds of doubt, of fear, in my daughter's mind while she was at her most vulnerable. I was paralyzed, watching the woman I had trusted with my child's life systematically tear us apart. Then came the final scene. It's burned into my memory. Chloe, with that same unsettling smile, leaned in one last time. "You are a special girl, and I am your real mommy now," she said, her voice a chillingly sweet lullaby. A sound escaped my lips, a small, horrified gasp. It was followed by a low, guttural laugh that was so full of malice and victory, I felt like I was going to be sick. It wasn't the soft, gentle laugh she used around us. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated evil. In that moment, I knew I was too late. I was a few miles away, watching a grainy live feed of a woman stealing my daughter's heart and mind. I didn't even bother to grab my keys. I just ran. I ran out of the house, out of the parking lot, and towards my home, my heart a frantic, panicked drumbeat in my chest. I had to get there. I had to expose her. Before I lost my daughter forever, when I burst through the door, my lungs were burning, and the cold air of the evening hit me like a slap. Chloe was in the living room, reading a book to Lily on the couch, the very picture of domestic serenity. She looked up, her expression a perfect mix of surprise and mild concern, a performance so polished it almost made me doubt myself. "Sarah, you're back early," she said, her voice a calm ripple in the chaos of my mind. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid it would jump out of my chest. I didn't say anything. I just stared at her, at the woman who was a stranger in my home, a wolf in sheep's clothing. I walked over to the bookshelf, my hands fumbling for the camera I had hidden. She watched me, her calm exterior cracking just for a second, a flicker of something sharp and calculating in her eyes. I tore the camera from its hiding spot, my fingers shaking as I unplugged the cords. "What's that?" she asked, a hint of steel in her voice now. "What are you doing?" Lily, sensing the shift in the air, started to whimper. She reached for Chloe, her little arms outstretched. My heart shattered into a million pieces. "Lily, come to Mommy," I said, my voice barely a whisper. But Lily just clung tighter to Chloe, burying her face in her shoulder. "Mommy is busy," Chloe said, her voice a poisonous echo of the words I'd heard on the camera. That was it, the last straw. I looked at Chloe, at the beautiful lie she had created, and I felt a cold, righteous fury course through me. "Get out," I said, my voice rising. "Get out of my house right now." She looked at me, a smirk forming on her lips, and then she turned to Lily. "It looks like your mommy and I need to have a little talk. I'll be right back." She handed Lily to me, her touch feeling like a brand on my skin, and walked towards the kitchen, as if she owned the place that I stood there, holding a terrified Lily, her body stiff and resistant in my arms. I could hear Chloe on the phone in the kitchen, her voice low and furious. I could hear her telling someone. She found out. I don't know what to do. That's when the doorbell rang. Mark was standing there, a worried look on his face. "Hey, I got your texts," he said, stepping inside. "What's going on?" Before I could even answer, Chloe walked back into the living room, her face pale, but her expression firm. She looked at Mark with a tearful expression, a masterclass in deception. "Mark, thank God you're here," she said, her voice shaking. "Sarah, she's been acting so strange. She's yelling at me, and she's scaring Lily." The betrayal in her eyes was so convincing, it made my head spin. Mark's gaze shifted from me to her, a storm of confusion and distrust brewing in his eyes. He saw a distraught nanny and a hysterical wife. The old me, the me from a week ago, would have caved. I would have let her win. But the video was a cold, hard truth in my hand. I held the nanny cam out to him, my hand shaking violently. "Mark, look at this," I said, my voice trembling with the effort to stay calm. "Just watch it." He took the camera from me, his eyes flicking between the small black box and my frantic face. The argument was useless. The accusations and counter-accusations were just noise. I had the proof. I had the evidence. While he watched the video, I could see the shift in his face, the realization slowly dawning on him. The color drained from his cheeks as he saw her whispering to Lily, heard her chilling words. His face turned from confusion to disbelief, and then to a cold, hard anger I had never seen. He looked up at Chloe, who had gone completely still, the mask finally gone. The room was silent except for Lily's whimpers. The air was thick with a truth that was finally out in the open. Chloe tried to run, to say something, but Mark just pointed to the door. "Get out," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "And if you ever come near my family again, I will make you regret the day you were born." She didn't say a word. She just grabbed her bag and ran out the door, her footsteps a fading echo of the terror she had brought into our lives. It was over, but it wasn't. The real work, the work of healing, of rebuilding the trust with my daughter, had just begun. The locket was gone, and the blanket forts were just a memory. We had won the battle, but the war, the battle for my daughter's heart, was still raging inside of her.